Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood at the funeral of the person you loved the most, only to find out you never really knew them at all? I was married to Robert Matthews for 25 years. We had no children by choice and by circumstance, but we had a life, a quiet one. He worked in logistics, something vague but stable, and every year from June through November he traveled for work. Contracts in another state, he said. He hated technology, never liked video calls, insisted on handwritten letters or the occasional phone call. Old-fashioned, he'd laugh, sipping tea on our porch. And I believed him. I never questioned the rhythm of our life. I filled the house with books and Sunday casseroles. We had our traditions, our little world. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The day of Robert's funeral, the sky hung low, gray and heavy, like it understood something I didn't yet. I arrived at the church early, maybe too early. I'd spent hours choosing what to wear, dark, modest, the picture of a grieving widow. I was his wife, after all, his only wife. Or so I thought. When I stepped into the sanctuary, something felt off. The pews were nearly full already, filled with unfamiliar faces. I assumed they were work friends, distant colleagues, logistics people perhaps, but their eyes, they didn't hold sympathy. They held suspicion. Some looked through me, others, like I didn't belong. Then I saw her. A woman about my age stood near the front, dressed in black, but her grief wasn't quite like mine. It was sharp, almost angry. She was flanked by two adults, a tall man in his 30s and a woman a few years younger. They didn't look sad. They looked betrayed. At me. I didn't know why until the service ended. I was halfway down the aisle when it happened. The man, her son, I would later learn, stood and pointed at me. Loud enough for every head to turn, he shouted, "You had the nerve to show up? You were nothing but our father's mistress." The room fell silent. Someone gasped. I froze. Mistress? The woman, Carolyn, I'd later find out, didn't stop him. Her eyes, glassy and red, stared straight through me, not confused, not surprised, just wounded, like she'd been waiting for this moment. And me? I didn't even know her name. I opened my mouth to speak, to deny, to explain, but there were no words. My body moved before my mind did. I walked out of that church, shoes clicking against the floor, pulse pounding in my ears like thunder. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. By the time I got home, I wasn't crying. I was frozen, stunned into silence. And somewhere beneath the shock, I felt it, this sharp, aching knowledge settling in my chest. Robert had another life, a wife, a family, and I had been the other woman all along. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything, stay with me. And if this story resonates, consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a comment. I believe stories like this can help someone else survive their own storm. I spent the rest of that day sitting on the living room floor, still in my funeral clothes. The air in the house felt different, thicker, heavier, like it knew. I kept waiting to cry, for the tears to come and make it real, but all I felt was this gnawing emptiness. Not because Robert was gone, but because everything I thought I knew had been wiped away in a single sentence. You were nothing but our father's mistress. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the house like a stranger, touching things we'd once shared. His reading glasses on the kitchen counter, the half-folded blanket on the couch, the scent of his cologne still faint on the jacket hanging by the door. I should have thrown it away. I didn't. I couldn't. The next morning, I opened the filing cabinet he always kept locked. The key had been tucked in his desk drawer beneath a stack of bills. I thought maybe I'd find comfort in his old receipts, silly work notes, anything to remind me he was real, that our life was real. What I found was order, detailed, deliberate order. Plane tickets booked every year, like clockwork, June 1st outbound, December 1st return, every year for 25 years. Not to any corporate headquarters, but to a small city in Pennsylvania, Carolyn's city. There were rent payments, a second health insurance policy with Carolyn listed as a dependent, utility bills for an apartment I'd never seen, a life so carefully structured it could have passed as fiction, except it wasn't. It was his truth, my lie. He lived half the year with her, with them, and the other half with me. I wasn't even angry, not yet. I was numb. My hands moved without thought, collecting papers, scanning details, trying to fit puzzle pieces together, but the picture they formed wasn't one I recognized. That evening, I opened my email to a flood of messages I never asked for. You should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you show up and pretend to be grieving? You were waiting for him to die, weren't you? I read every line like they were punishments I'd earned. Even messages from people I'd known for years. People who had eaten at our table, who had sent us Christmas cards, disappeared, silent, ghosted. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask what I knew. They just assumed. The next morning, I opened my garage and found the word liar spray painted across the door in red. Not subtle, not clever, just loud and cruel. A neighbor offered to help repaint. I thanked him, said I'd handle it, but I didn't. I left it there for 3 days. It felt honest in a way. The house was no longer my sanctuary. It whispered at me. The mugs we used on Sunday mornings mocked me from the shelf. The calendar, still pinned to the fridge, showed anniversary dinner, April 9th, circled in blue ink. That had been just a few weeks ago. He had kissed my forehead that night and said, "You're the only home I've ever needed." I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I started sleeping with the bedroom light on. I double-checked the locks 3 times before bed. I jumped when someone knocked, even if it was the mailman. My world had shifted, and I no longer trusted the ground under my feet. And then came the guilt. Was I really that blind? Did I see signs and ignore them? There were clues, I suppose. Robert never let me pack his suitcase. He always handled the travel himself. He hated video calls, said technology stressed him out. He didn't like having photos taken. I thought it was humility. Now I wondered if it was secrecy. And still, I loved him. That was the hardest part. I wasn't clinging to some fantasy. I was mourning a man I adored. I still remembered how he danced with me in the kitchen, even when there was no music. How he left notes in my lunch bag when I was still teaching. How he held my hand while we watched storms roll in. Was any of it real? I didn't know. I hired a lawyer. Not because I was ready to fight, but because the reading of the will was coming, and I had no idea what to expect. I didn't even know what I was to Robert anymore. Widow, mistress, stranger. I sat in the kitchen that night, wedding photo in hand. The 2 of us, younger, full of plans, caught in a laugh I no longer remembered. I studied that picture like it might give me an answer, a clue, a crack in the image, but it didn't. We looked happy. We looked whole. That was the final cruelty, I think. The grief wasn't just over his death. It was over the life I thought we had, and the truth that it may never have existed at all. The day of the will reading felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already written, and I was the villain. I almost didn't go. I spent that morning pacing the kitchen, keys in hand, my coat draped over a chair like it was waiting for a braver woman to pick it up. Part of me told myself it didn't matter. Whatever Robert had left behind, it couldn't undo what he'd done. But another part, the part of me still clinging to some sliver of clarity, needed to know. Had he even acknowledged me at all? The lawyer's office sat in a cold brick building downtown. I arrived last. Carolyn was already there, arms tightly crossed, flanked by her 2 children. They didn't even glance in my direction. I sat alone in the back corner, clutching my purse like it could shield me from whatever was coming. The lawyer, a weary man in a beige suit, cleared his throat and began. Robert's estate was substantial, more than I had ever known. Multiple properties, investment accounts, retirement funds. I had always thought we lived comfortably because he was frugal. I didn't know we were quietly wealthy. And then came the division. Carolyn would receive a house in Pennsylvania, her son and daughter, modest trusts. And then the lawyer looked up. The remainder of the estate, including but not limited to the Connecticut marital home, all investment portfolios, retirement savings, and liquid assets, are to be transferred to Diane Matthews, effective immediately. The room fell silent. I couldn't breathe. Then came the sound of a chair scraping hard against tile. "What?" Carolyn's son shouted, standing, face flushed with fury. "This has to be a mistake. She knew. She had to know. You don't give everything to someone unless they're in on it." His sister turned toward me, eyes narrow and sharp. "You stole our father," she said. "And now you want his money too?" I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. "I didn't know," I whispered. No one believed me, and somehow that hurt more than the betrayal itself. I left quietly, holding back the heat rising in my chest, the shame I couldn't seem to shake. But the storm was only beginning. That night, an envelope appeared at my door. No return address. Inside, photocopied legal filings, screenshots of online comments, and one sentence scrawled in red marker across the top. "You thought we were done?" There was a photo of me, standing outside the post office, circled in pen. No signature, but I didn't need one. The next day, the lawsuit was filed. Carolyn's children accused me of coercion, manipulation, and undue influence over a vulnerable man. They claimed I isolated Robert, convinced him to change his will, and exploited his illness for personal gain. None of it was true, but the truth didn't matter anymore, only perception. I stopped sleeping, stopped going outside, stopped answering the phone. I felt like a prisoner in a house filled with furniture I now owned but no longer recognized. I called my lawyer. "I want to settle," I said. "You don't have to," he replied. "We have documentation, witnesses." Robert made those changes with full mental clarity. "It will hold." "I know," I said, "but I want peace." And so I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to Carolyn. I asked her to meet me, not in court, not with lawyers, just woman to woman. She replied within an hour, "Tomorrow at 10, don't be late." I arrived early. She was already seated at the cafe, hands folded, eyes tired but alert. I barely sat down when she asked, voice calm but cutting, "Did you love him?" The question hit like a slap. "Yes," I said quietly, "with everything I had, and I didn't know about you, not for 1 second." She nodded once, her jaw clenched. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "He told me you were a fling," she said. "From before we got married," I asked once. He laughed and said, "Don't worry about her." We sat in silence for a long time. Two women who had been lied to by the same man in different homes on alternating years. "You know what hurts the most?" she said eventually. "I thought I was the one being tolerated. Turns out we were both being kept." She reached into her purse and slid over an envelope. "His original will," she said. "Before he changed it, I was the sole heir. I think he knew he was dying, and I think somehow he thought giving you everything would fix something." I stared at the document. My name wasn't on it. "I didn't ask for the money," I said. "I still don't know what to do with it." She looked at me, not warmly, but not with hate. "Neither do I." We agreed privately and without fanfare that part of the estate would go into a trust for her grandchildren. Another portion would fund a charity in Robert's name. The rest, I would keep, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. Months later, when her son tried to reopen the case, Carolyn made a public statement. She stood beside me in court. When reporters asked her why, she didn't hesitate. "She is not the villain," she said. "She's a victim, just like me." And for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt seen. Not as a thief, not as a mistress, but as a woman who loved and was lied to and chose grace anyway. I didn't tell anyone I was moving. Not Carolyn, not the neighbors, not even my lawyer. I just packed up my life quietly, one drawer at a time. I donated what I could, sold the rest. I left Robert's things untouched. Not out of anger, but because they didn't belong to me anymore. They were artifacts from a life I now understood had never fully existed. I bought a small cottage in a sleepy town 2 hours away. It had a white fence, a creaky porch swing, and a maple tree in the front yard. There were no headlines here, no whispers, no ghosts. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a gentle mutt with a crooked tail and soulful eyes. I named her Penny. She followed me everywhere, slept by my side, and watched me like she knew I was still learning how to breathe again. I started volunteering at the library on Mondays. By spring, I was reading to children in the story corner and baking pies for the community garden's weekend market. People called me Miss Diane, just Miss Diane, and that was enough. Carolyn visited once, then again. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat. We weren't friends exactly, but we'd survived something most people wouldn't understand. And that bonded us in a quiet, sacred way. At a summer dinner with her family, her granddaughter called out, "Pass the rolls, Auntie Di," and no one corrected her. No one flinched. I smiled, unsure whether to laugh or cry, because in that moment, I realized something. I had lost everything I thought mattered, but I'd gained something real, something I never knew I needed. And as I sat on my porch that evening, a cup of tea warming my hands, Penny curled up beside me, I whispered the words I wish I'd known sooner. He betrayed me, but I didn't betray myself, and that's what saved me. I don't tell this story to dwell in pain. I tell it because someone out there needs to hear it. If you've ever lost your footing and had to rebuild, know this, your truth matters, and you can build something even stronger from it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters too.